Our next guest is an acclaimed sculptor, best known for his busts of the musician Bruce Springsteen. His name is Steve Zorochin, and we're pleased to welcome him to the show. So Steve, how did you get your start in sculpting?
Well, growing up in Princeton, believe it or not, being that this town is shared with the university, town and gown, so to speak, as a young kid, I would wander through the campus. And I guess about when I was 12 years old, I wandered into this studio. And there were these massive boxers. And like any 12-year-old kid, you're like, oh man, boxing, look at these things, they're really cool. So that left an impression on me. And in addition to that, my mother was friends with a professor at Princeton, and Professor Oates was his name, and he was an art historian. And they used to send home art news magazines and books that Professor Oates never used or needed to use anymore. And my mother would give them to me, and I'd look at them. And I was fascinated with these books. About 9 years old, 10 years old. And also, the pesky kid I was constantly bored, looking for something to do. And my mother's favorite saying would be, go make me something. Mm-hmm. And so at a very early age, it would be, go down in the basement and make me something.
That's pretty constructive advice then.
Yes, right. And I was living in a house with my Italian grandparents. And that basement was really cool. There were all kinds of neat things down there. It wasn't your typical basement for storage. There were workbenches and canning rooms.
Your grandfather made his own wine, maybe?
Exactly. Yeah. My grandfather made all 7 of his children crush grapes with their bare feet in a big cement vat he had in the basement.
So it's almost like a foundry. Things were being produced.
At that point I didn't know it because I was just too young, but there was a cool table that I could go to and hammer things, and what I brought back to my mother clearly was not a piece of art. But she would always say, oh, that's nice, thank you.
At the beginning, though.
At the beginning. Yeah. And so there were these journals being given to me. There was encouragement from my parents, to be doing the creative thing. And right about the same time, I wandered into Joe Brown's studio on campus. And so those things kind of stuck with me, and I really enjoyed them. And so, interestingly enough, about 10 years later, I ended up being Joe Brown's apprentice, which that kind of thing can only happen in a small community like Princeton.
It's like playing basketball, and then you're Michael Jordan's teammate. You idolize him, and then you're playing with him or something.
Yeah, you could. Well, in more like if let's say you hung out around a gym and ended up being coached by your high school coach,
right.
and you bump into, say, Pete Carell's son. You're playing ball with Pete Carell's son, and all of a sudden you meet Pete Carell on the course at Princeton, and it's interesting because all the community interweave.
That happened to me.
Really?
Yeah, with Jim, yeah.
Really?
And he knocked on my shot. He goes, "That's not a great shot. You got to, put your elbow in."
Oh, interesting.
Anyway, sorry.
That's very cool. So there you have it. That sort of was the crucible for the itch that I couldn't scratch, so to speak, and.
So you apprenticed with Joe Brown, acclaimed sculptor. What are some of the fundamentals that he taught to you? What are some of the principles?
And there's a picture there.
Yeah. Well, this picture of Joe this was probably in the 30s. When I met Joe, he was in his 70s.
And that's Joe Louis.
This piece that Joe's working on is called Antaeus, and it's the story where if you're knocked down, you draw strength from the ground and you get back up.
Oh.
And so the story that Joe was trying to tell here is that you want to be don't be a quitter, you know. And so one of the things Joe taught me was basically you're not going to be able to do anything in life unless you try. And along with trying comes failure. So don't be defeated by failure. That's a common thing that can happen to everybody. And so right about the time I met Joe, other than the time I wandered into the studio when I was a kid, I had already been to 2 art schools. I'd already been to New York City. I'd already been to Boston Museum School in Boston, and was pretty discouraged with the whole creative process, what I was seeing there. There were things that you could not, everything in these academic, the visual arts as well as academic programs were not key to you doing hands-on work. It was mostly discussions, some studio time.
Theoretical, scholarly.
Exactly. Footnotes. And they'd say, we're going to do a day in a museum today. We're going to go off and look at something in a museum.
It's not
somewhere.
very practical.
Well, exactly. So what I realized was this was a place where I could really learn how to make something with my hands. So those are that was the key thing. Joe is encouraging me not to give up, and if you really want to learn, you're going to go over here to this work table and you're going to use your hands. And Joe also had a very interesting work table. It was covered with bronzes. And so here comes a 21-year-old kid dying to learn something, and Joe's basically having confidence in me and saying, go ahead, finish these bronzes. And so that was pretty exciting for me, that I could actually work on a real piece of art.
I kind of like that, though. It's like, here you go. Not that he didn't give you some direction, but he threw you in the water, basically. Like, you know,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the itch was there. I was really trying to express myself, and was fortunate enough to meet a man who was willing to share that with me. And that's the other thing today. Very few masters out there that people can work under. I think people in the creative art world, you can be disillusioned very quickly. There just aren't enough masters around that can teach these kids.
It was like that book. I forget how people become geniuses, and I just forgot the guy who wrote it. But he said a lot of it was a combination of talent, but timing. You were in the right situation at the right time with an itch and talent.
Yes. And again, we'll go back to the same thing. The subjects were awesome. Most of the things in Joe's studio were athletes. Again, the fighters. I thought that was very interesting. And but Joe not only was an educator. He really believed in sharing the gifts that he had. Mm-hmm. He one of his favorite sayings that I liked was, art wasn't made by a few people for a few people. You know, art isn't made by a few people for a few people. And that means in these museums, things can die. And when we make a piece of art and put it on display in a gallery or museum, we like to think that it's alive, but really it's a way of showing something that's dead. And Joe believed in getting it out in the world sharing it with everybody.
But that's what we see.
Sculpture itself, because it can be put outside, and some of Joe's work is right outside Veterans Stadium, and here you're
That's
firemen.
Joe Brown? And I didn't even know that. So I Googled
Yeah, that's Joe Brown.
the old man.
Joe had quite a few monumental pieces in Philadelphia. He was a Philadelphia boy. He was from South Philadelphia, and actually was a professional fighter himself.
So he was Italian, really, and Brown was just a.
It's Brune. It's pronounced. His name was Brown, but it was Brune, and he was Jewish, a young Jewish boy from Philadelphia. He admired his brother, who was a professional fighter and made a living doing that. And Joe decided that he would box, and he boxed for a year when he was at Temple University. And I think he only had one loss, actually.
Wow.
But that being said, this piece on the wall here has that community feel, because I was a volunteer fireman back in the 80s, and they were looking for somebody to make a monument for the Mercer County Firemen's Association. And I got wind of it, and I approached some people, and again, was being in the right place at the right time. Here I was going to the fire academy in Trenton, and I ended up being able to make a monument of the very man that they named the fire training center after, Cap Dempster.
Oh, right, the Dempster site.
Exactly. And that's a training facility for the police, first aiders, and also for young firemen. There are some buildings there. But Cap Dempster statue is there, and this is my first commission.
That's you.
That's 1981. Yeah.
And here is your most recent work.
Okay.
And
Yep.
people are talking. My wife, who is that? What is that? We had to get out of the car and check it out. 'Cause we weren't sure from a distance what it was.
Thank you. This is, if you'll note, the trees in the back are pine trees, and this is on the boardwalk. Down in the Jersey Shore. The head was originally made for Asbury Park. There was a exhibition, a call for sculptor, so to speak, and there was something like 50 sculptors. This sculpture was made for Asbury Park of Bruce Springsteen, and it was in Kennedy Park, and they also had a copy in Long Branch, and very interesting panoramic shot. I don't know if there's one there, but this actually has the ocean behind it, and so that's what this piece is.
But to me, he is like a soldier, to give out. He's on the cusp. He's marching to keep on doing his music. I mean, why do you humanitarian though?
Well, it's a very good point you're making, because that whole thing about being a fighter has always stayed with me, and I've always been fascinated with other artists who are fighters, and I see Springsteen as a fighter. If I listen to his lyrics, he's definitely like an Antaeus type of figure. He's not a quitter, but he talks about the human condition a lot. And if you look at read these lyrics, he's a very humble guy. Even today, his later work, still, he's obviously very successful, but he's still a very humble guy. So that's where the humanitarian name comes in. And so there you go. It's Bruce Springsteen to me is a fighter, but a humanitarian as well.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. It's been a good interview, and we wish you continued success.
Thank you. Thank you very much.